Welcome back to Made for More. I am your host, Holly J. Moore. I am a divorce lawyer on a mission to help people use their adversity to overcome and show up as the best version of themselves. I am joined today and every day by my producer, Aaron Bender.
I know, Holly, we usually have a lot of fun in this first segment, little banter, little witty, this, that, and the other. And I will mention that this particular episode might be a little heavy. It does come with a trigger warning for a lot of people. We'll put those in the show notes, but it's serious topic time.
It is. And I'll be honest, I'm feeling a little uncomfortable about it. But it's a really important topic, I think, and it's probably getting more important by the day with everybody's access to the internet and all sorts of mediums where you can see, hear, and watch almost anything that you want at any given time. And all the dangers that come with that. So I think it's hugely important. I think it's something that a lot of people are struggling with. As a divorce attorney, I know it has torn relationships and marriages apart. So it's something that needs to be talked about, but it's a little bit uncomfortable. But we're going to get through it together. We are here today with Joshua Shea, pornography addiction coach and author. We're going to be getting into some heavy topics, but very necessary topics. Joshua, thank you so much for being with us today.
And thank you for inviting me on your program, Holly. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So I know you yourself have a history with pornography addiction. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I was a pornography addict for 24 years. Started when I was 12 years old. I was also an alcoholic for 22 years. Started when I was 14 years old. And just about 10 years ago, I got fired from a company that I was 1/3 owner of. I ran day-to-day operations. I was fired because of my drinking. I thought that was my only real problem. When I ended up going to rehab, it didn't take much time for the experts there to say, whoa, you have a massive issue with pornography as well. And in delving into that, I actually learned that predated the alcoholism and that probably wreaked far more havoc on my life and my relationships than the alcohol ever did.
This is really interesting because we shoot a couple episodes a day, and the episode that we just shot right before yours was talking about drug addiction. And, you know, I haven't even we've done like 30 episodes. None of them have been about addiction so far. So it's very interesting that these two episodes are lining up on the same day. But so I would love to get, well, first of all, how does somebody know if they are addicted to pornography?
Well, it's like any other health condition, and addiction is a disease because it does change the chemistry of the brain. There are symptoms that go with it. With addiction in general, there are a lot of symptoms that are true with every addiction, and then as you get into individual addictions, there are specific symptoms. For instance, with pornography addiction, the tendency when one is using pornography to look for that perfect video clip or perfect picture to finish their routine with is something that you see around almost all addicts. But there are generally, depending on who you look at in their list, 10 to 13 symptoms of pornography addiction, and it's a matter of, like I said, any medical condition, matching up the symptoms with what's going on in your life.
So would you say it's more a matter of what is happening in the brain versus like frequency or something more outward that determines if someone is addicted or not?
Absolutely, 100%. And I think this is true from addiction to addiction to addiction. Yes, every addiction has its own different side effects. You know, if you're a gambling addict, you will lose your house before you are a cigarette addict. But at the core, what's going on in our brains is basically the same thing. When we were young, we were faced with some kind of trauma that we didn't manage. We didn't have the problem solving skills, we didn't have the coping skills. And what happened was we were introduced to something, in my case, pornography and alcohol, right around that time. And instead of developing the proper problem solving skills, we realized, hey, if I get involved in this behavior, this makes me feel good. And that's because there's a release of brain chemicals. Oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, endorphins, that all make you feel good, that all make anxiety go away, that all make stress go away, and that also give people a sense of control and power. And when everything's crumbling around you, that's a mighty useful thing to be able to go and lean on.
Right. Useful but destructive.
Absolutely. It's, at first, nobody understands the chemistry of what's going on in the mind. You just realize you feel good. And whether it's the excitement of gambling or the excitement of the naked people with pornography or the great taste of the food, if you have a food addiction, you never realize what's going on until you try to stop. And when you can't, then you realize, oh, wow, I am really a slave to this.
Right. So when I was 21 years old, I spent a year in Washington, D.C. and worked for Congress. And as part of my work there, I was involved in a couple different think tanks that were doing some different research around pornography. And it's been a while now, over 20 years since I did that. But from what I recall, what they were saying was one of the most destructive things about pornography is when someone begins watching it, they have to increase the stimuli over time, or, the stimuli over time to get the same effect. And I think the research that they were doing at the time really was trying to sort of pinpoint the connection between increasing that stimuli to more and more violent forms of pornography and, severe, hardcore, whatever the proper words are for it. And how that was, possibly connected to violence against women and domestic violence and things like that. Is that something that you've seen both in your personal experience with pornography as well as your coaching and speaking and all of that?
Absolutely. And what we've seen over the 25 years is that as pornography becomes more accessible. Back when I got hooked, the toughest part was trying to find a magazine.
Yeah, trying to get that Playboy, like from under your friend's parents' bed.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And now we give every 10-year-old a phone and say, hey, have a good day at school, Johnny.
Right.
So access is not the issue anymore.
Yes.
It's what's being depicted there. And there was a study by, I believe it was a Canadian college, that looked at 100 of the top videos from two porn sites. And they found that in 95% of these videos that either the woman was either physically or verbally assaulted by the man. In 95% of these videos, this same college then interviewed college-age women, and they found in completely consensual situations that 40% of women of college age had been with men who had gone too far in a sexual exchange. Now, this doesn't talk about addiction, but this just talks about the effect of pornography on our younger men. Now that all of them can watch it, and there is more than enough for 50 lifetimes out there, you can absolutely see why the messaging of pornography, which was male dominance over females, is permeating our young folks. Porn does send a message that aggressiveness is absolutely okay in a sexual situation. And ironically, even before I saw this study, I was giving a speech for a women's sexuality group at a college near where I live, and one of the young ladies, this was pre-pandemic, raised her hand and said, have you heard about women our age who don't want to have sex with virgin men? And I said, no, I've not heard anything about this. And I saw the eyes of the other young ladies in the room kind of perk up and see them nod. They don't want to have to retrain men who have grown up watching pornography, how to actually act in bed. And many of them, and I've talked with a lot of ladies since, who talk about, a perfectly normal, nice, docile guy, gets into a bedroom situation and pushes them down and calls them a name because that's what he's grown up on, watching pornography, and he thinks that's what the behavior is supposed to be in the bedroom. We don't teach kids that pornography is not a documentary. Pornography is not a reality show. It is completely fake.
Right. Yes. So do you think that someone can look at pornography from time to time and that it doesn't have destructive effect? Like, is there a level of viewing pornography that is okay and not destructive to a relationship? Or is your view like it's a hard no, you can never look at it?
It's a hard no for me, and I think it's a hard no for a lot of people. But much like people can drink, much like people can do gamble and do other behaviors without having them go over the edge, I think that there are people who can look at porn, whether if that's morally okay with them, if that's acceptable, if that's cool with their partner, if that's cool with who they are, that's fine. If we told our young men and our young ladies, much like we teach them not to smoke, not to drink when they are young, we can teach our kids not to look at this stuff. We can teach our kids this isn't good for you, but when you're an adult, you can make your own decisions. One of the biggest things I run up against when I talk to parents groups is that, my kids aren't ready for the birds and the bees. And so I don't think this is the birds and the bees speech. I think this is like when you're 8 years old, you don't have a sip of dad's beer. When you're, 12 years old, you don't grab grandma's cigarette. You can do all that stuff when you're old enough to make those own decisions. But because porn is taboo, because naked people are things we don't like to talk about with our kids, we're sending them, straight out into a world of high-speed internet where they can watch things that are 10 times worse than we could when we were kids. Right.
Yes. I know as part of your story, you were actually arrested for, what was it specifically? Like luring an underage?
I was in a chat room with a female who was a teenager, and she was doing sexual things. And I hate to admit that because I was so ill at the time, and it still shames me, 12 years later. It did turn my life around, but I was in a chat room and an underage female started doing sexual things, and I continued to watch it, and I actually took 2 screen captures of it. And that's when I got in trouble back in 2014.
Yeah, so I think that underage pornography is, I think as a society, something that is probably one of the most shameful things that, that can go on. So, I was going to ask you, how did you get over that shame? But maybe it sounds like you still are sort of feeling that.
Well, I don't feel the shame for myself. I got myself into that situation. I stopped taking my mental health meds that I'd been on since I was 20 years old, and that was part of the fallout of it, that I made some poor decisions looking at pornography, and I, paid the price. And I deserved it 100%. And it was a wake-up call. What I feel bad for is my parents, my wife, my kids, anybody who's a friend of mine, anybody who was associated me at the time who ended up, being really rocked by this, being really affected by this negatively. They never asked to be involved in that. I went and I got my head screwed on correctly. I stopped drinking. I stopped using pornography. It's been over 10 years since I've done that with both of those things. But now that my kids are in their 20s, I wonder, what effect did my arrest have on them? Do any of my parents' friends look at them differently or look at their parenting differently? That's the shame that I feel, is that I brought this situation upon so many other people.
Are you still married to your same wife?
Absolutely, absolutely. I passed two polygraphs that showed that I had never done anything like that before. I had never touched any child in real life, that I was not a pedophile. I went through many different assessments that they have, and I ranked as low as you can on most scales. For me, I didn't probably care if she was 16 or 17 or 18 or 19. When I saw anybody who looked like a child online, I immediately went past them. But with her, I guess it was a gray enough area that I let my poor judgment continue engaging with her.
So how, because I know as part of your work, you also do coach the partner from, or, you know, on the betrayal trauma that a partner might feel when they find out that their partner has been addicted to porn and not having been honest with them. So tell me a little bit about that work, or how you and your wife got past that. Like, share a little bit about how that goes.
Well, what was interesting was, my wife and I did the work at the time, and her first thing was, I want you to get well. We can discuss marriage, we can discuss everything at first. So I did 10 weeks at a rehab for alcoholism. I then did 7 weeks at a rehab for sex and porn addiction. And after being without those materials, and after starting to do some real trauma work to figure out what happened, and maybe being sexually molested when I was a kid affected me as I was growing up. Maybe being emotionally abused by my grandmother as I was growing up had some effect. Now, that's, again, no excuse for how I ended up the way I am, but it does help explain it.
Right.
And that's the big thing when I talk to my clients, whether they are a porn addict or whether they are living with the porn addict and dealing with the trauma, is it's time to dissect how you got to this place. Because that's what I needed to do to actually recover. And the people that I have seen who went up in recovery with me, who are still recovered after 10 years, the number one piece was that they went back and dealt with and fixed and processed that trauma that happened when they were young. Yeah. So to me, recovery is not just about quitting your behavior.
Right.
Recovery is about finding why you became an addict in the first place.
Yeah. And then would you agree that recovery is also about like doing the internal work and having the growth as a human being so that you don't relapse, and that you can sort of, maybe even recognize more productive coping mechanisms and things like that?
Absolutely. And that's what's very important. I have never seen anybody actually recover on their own. It's because if you could, you would.
Right.
You don't have the tools, you don't have the skills, you don't have the ability to look inward and fully process what you need to process. I was a journalist for many, many years before I got into recovery. And I think it's my ability to ask questions more than anything else that sets me apart from some coaches, and the fact that I went through this myself. But it's that I'm okay with asking difficult questions. And there are a lot of people in this world who avoid difficult questions or simply have never been asked them before. And when you finally ask them, that forces some introspection that otherwise may not happen.
Right. So I definitely want to talk more about your journey now and your coaching. But before we get too far away from kids, I definitely want to ask you, like, as a parent, how do we keep our kids safe, both from, looking at pornography themselves, but also putting themselves in a situation where they are, lured in by like another online person, that type of a thing? What should we do with our kids?
I think it's age-appropriate education. At 5 years old, a child doesn't need to know the word pornography. But at 5 years old, you can teach a child nobody should ever take a picture of you with your clothes off. And you should never take a picture of anybody with their clothes off. And maybe when they're 6 years old and they start school, you can start talking about, hey, if another child or one of your friends has a phone or a tablet and you see a picture of a naked person or a couple naked people, tell a teacher or tell us, because that's not good for kids to see. Kids aren't supposed to see that, and we want to protect you. And
Yeah.
you can make it non-threatening. The problem is most of us were raised with the idea that you're a pervert if you see this stuff. There's something wrong with you. You know, you are, from the wrong side of the tracks. You're a deviant. And I think what we need to do is just make it a safe space where we can be, very on the offense with our messaging. And I think once you get, especially a boy at 12 years old, tell them about porn-induced erectile dysfunction. Let them know that there's a percentage of guys who use porn to the point that they cannot perform with a girl. Most 12-year-olds don't want a porn addiction. They want a girlfriend.
Right.
And if we can almost scare them straight with facts, that's better. But
Okay.
I think we
But
can
wait,
make
you'll
it
have to
very
rewind a little bit
age-appropriate.
there.
Okay.
Because I may be learning something new. So
Okay.
what is this thing?
Porn-induced erectile dysfunction.
That's the one. Okay, that's a real thing?
That is a real thing. That has been proven now. And it happens when a guy, and this usually starts with guys in their late teens or early 20s, although it can happen to men straight up into their 50s and 60s, is that they use so much pornographic material that they get to a point that they are not able to perform with a real life person. And scientifically, it makes sense because our brains don't process imagery as well as we might think they do. Our eyes process it well, but our brains don't necessarily. Also, we know, based on studies, that you're going to get the biggest dopamine hit and those other chemicals with new imagery. That's why most people don't use the same porn twice. New imagery gets a bigger reaction. Well, if you're looking at pornography all the time, and if you've been married 5 years, 10 years, or been with the same person, how many hundreds of times have you seen them naked? How many hundreds of times have you had sex? You know how that movie ends. So
Right.
eventually the brain stops producing the dopamine and the other needed chemicals to get the reaction going so they can complete the sex act. Ironically, they're usually still perfectly fine with the pornography itself. I had a couple, one of my first couple clients, who they had a workaround where the guy would sit in one room, the girl would sit in another room, and they would sext via laptops. Because if he was looking at her on a screen, it was like it was pornography.
Okay.
And then she would literally run to the bedroom right around the time he was going to finish. That's how they worked around his porn-induced erectile dysfunction until they came to see me for help. And it's hitting. So I would guess of my clients under 25 years old that are males, probably 75% have dealt with erectile dysfunction issues because of pornography.
Wow. Okay. So as you're talking, and my mind is just being blown all sorts of different ways, I'm wondering, do you ever see females with a pornography addiction?
Yes, and my clientele, the 4 years I've been doing this, my clientele for females has doubled every year.
Really?
It's more and more, and they are becoming more open with it, which is nice to see that it's the reputation is changing, that it's just a guy's disease.
Yeah.
Because with everything we have out there for pornography, a lot of it does target women. And now that women don't have to go to an adult theater, that they don't have to go to a shady bookshop to get this stuff, well,
they're more likely to access
They've
it.
got working sex organs just as much as a guy.
Right.
So we are seeing more and more women becoming addicted to pornography.
Wow. Okay. What would you say the percentages currently are in terms of men that are addicted to pornography versus women?
Depending on the statistics you look at, women in society is anywhere between 6 and 10%, and men is anywhere between 12 and 18%.
Okay.
But what I find even more interesting is that a very recent study post-pandemic came out. It said of men worldwide who use the internet, 90.5% of them look at porn at least once a month. Of women across the world who use the internet, 60.2% look at pornography at least once a month. So it's not even, not even about being an addict.
Yeah.
It's the fact that you are more likely to consume porn than not consume porn in today's world.
Wow. Okay. So, and do you, from your work, do you feel like this is just only going to be the statistics are going to be getting higher? And do you think, what do you attribute that to? Do you think it's just accessibility? Or, we're all just dopamine addicts?
We're dopamine addicts.
Yeah.
It's a couple different things. We had the pandemic, which probably moved things 10 years faster in a course of 2 years than anything else.
Right.
Because we now see people with certain websites out there making their own pornography at home and selling it themselves. That is a huge industry now. There are millions of more people doing that than there were just a few years ago. And I think that social media has also contributed to it. Most of the people, men and women who I work with, like to talk about how they will start with social media and end up using pornography because they get triggered, because social media allows so much these days. When I was in high school, going back to the mid to late 90s, we're talking about if there was a Polaroid photo of the sexy cheerleader and her buff quarterback boyfriend at the beach wearing their bathing suits, that thing would have got passed around like a joint at the lunch table. Nowadays, with Instagram, every 15 and 16-year-old boy or girl is expected to basically have half-naked pictures of themselves online.
Right.
So I think that society itself has dropped a lot of the taboos towards not just sexuality, but nudity in general.
Yes. That was going to actually be my next question is, do you think pornography has become more acceptable over time?
100%. One of the scariest statistics is that there was a poll asking what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, and more teenagers found not recycling to be unacceptable than pornography.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's where we are as a society. Got it.
Yeah, it's not a matter of dad's Playboy under the mattress. It's dad's recyclables in the trash can.
Right. Okay. My husband will be so happy to hear that. He is a recycling freak. Okay. So let's talk about you've had your own sordid history with pornography. Mm-hmm. At what point were you like, I'm going to make it my life's work to help others, and why?
Shortly after getting out of rehab, I went to the bookstore, if you remember what those were, and I looked for a book on pornography addiction. And I found books on addiction. I found books that could help my alcoholism, but I found nothing on pornography addiction. And having been a writer for so long and understanding that I was probably going to go towards a career in freelance writing at that point, I decided I would write a book about my journey along with what I had learned. And so I did that. I thought that would be my only contribution to the world. And after the book came out, I had some messages from some addicts, but I was swamped by girlfriends and wives. Oh my God, you fixed yourself. How do I fix my guy?
Oh.
And that's when I was like, oh, well, what are you talking about? And I got to talk to some of these ladies. And then I teamed up with a friend of mine who's a marriage and family therapist in California, and we ended up writing a book together about betrayal trauma, him talking about it from the expert point of view, and me talking about it from the addict's point of view. And this just kind of got this big, thousands of sales later, this got this whole thing going, and I was doing very well as a public speaker. Then the pandemic hit. And you couldn't make $1 doing that anymore. So this same friend said, why don't you get certified as a coach? You know so much about this stuff. You have your history with this stuff. You're very good at talking to people. You can't do anything right now because we're all stuck at home. Why don't you try this? And I'll tell you, I'm not a religious person. I don't know what it's like to feel like to be called to God, but in the last 4 years that I have been doing this coaching, this has felt more genuine to me and where I'm supposed to be more than anything else. And my outlook now is that all of that bad stuff that happened in my life, whether I brought it on or somebody foisted it upon me, it was supposed to happen so I could get here and help pornography addicts and help their partners not have to deal with this in a way that I didn't have anybody around when I was going through it.
Right. Wow, that's amazing. So if how for the partners out there that, I mean, okay, first, how would they know if their partner does have a pornography addiction?
Well, you could check his browser history. You could ask to see his, browser on his phone. You could, does he spend a lot of time in the bathroom unexplainedly? That's always been a big sign. Does he get flustered or frustrated if you ever talk about pornography? Will he not let you look at credit card statements or browser history? Is he very secretive? Has he tried to get you interested in pornography? There are a lot of red flags there. And if a guy or a girl, depending on who your partner is very evasive about this, that's a red flag. If you came at me about my gambling addiction, I would laugh. I don't have one. If somebody acts very evasive, where there's smoke, there's often fire, and I find that it's never usually a problem with a partner not knowing for sure. It's not knowing how to confront the partner, and it's not knowing how to get the partner to recognize it's a problem as well.
Okay, so that was my next question. So let's say the partner is like, okay, there's too many red flags. What's the next step?
Well, obviously he or she has to accept that they have a problem. And one of the things that I urge at that point is to start putting some boundaries in place. And I tell people flat out, if they come to me and they do not have a porn issue, I'm not going to manufacture one. I have had couples show up and a woman say, I caught him using porn twice this year. And then we talk about it and it's like, okay, well, you caught him using it because he's bad at hiding it. It's not that he has a problem. It's that he's bad at hiding it. He's not an addict. So I always tell people, sit down and talk to someone who's an expert. They're going to let you know, and they can probably tell within 30 minutes of a conversation whether somebody is exhibiting those symptoms of pornography or not. And if they are, then you have to decide, are you going to stick around? Are you going to hopefully watch them get help? And what does your role have to be in that? And it can be anywhere from slightly nudging them towards getting help to demanding they get help or you will leave, to about a third of guys or ladies, when confronted, will say, yep, you got me, and please get me help. And in that case, you don't have to do very much. You just have to be supportive. But you do have to address the issue. And then where you go from there depends on how the partner with or without the addiction reacts to the news that they are a sick person.
So if for the people that may think like, oh, it's me that has the addiction, what is their next step?
Talk to somebody. Find out where you are as an addict. Are you somebody who is on the verge of complete breakdown and your life falling apart because you are watching this stuff 8 hours a day, because you don't go out with friends anymore, because you excuse yourself at work to go to the bathroom so you can look at it? Or are you someone who, between relationships, maybe leans on it a little too much, to the point that it's unhealthy? You've got to find out, like any other medical condition, where you are on the spectrum. And then if you talk to a professional where you are on the spectrum, they can give you some ideas for what you can do to learn more about your situation and how to move forward individually.
Okay, great. Is there anything else that you think would be beneficial to share for either, the partners of people that are addicted or the people that are addicted themselves?
Absolutely. The one thing that I always try to drive home and that I still run up against is the idea that, well, I can't be a porn addict, or my husband or my wife can't be a porn addict, because of some socio-demographic issue. And the reality is I have met people from their teens straight up into their 70s, men, women, super professionals, doctors, lawyers. I've met smart people, stupid people, every color you can imagine, every religion you can imagine. This is just like any other addiction. Anybody can have it. You are not immune to this. Your partner is not immune to this. If you think there's a problem there, don't ignore it. Get some help and at least see where you are.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, and thank you for the work that you're doing out there with this issue, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I've got just a little bit more to say. Guys, the issue of pornography is not going anywhere. If anything, it's going to continue to get worse. And we've heard how destructive it can be for kids, for relationships, for yourself, for your career. The slippery slope is getting slipperier and faster. And if you think you have a problem, get help now. Try to cut it off at the pass. And as a parent, start talking to your kids about it. Talk to them about how the nature of it is very dangerous. And if it's not caught early on and not managed appropriately, it can lead to all sorts of bad places. And never forget, you were made for more.